How does the sacrifice, the seal, the oath, how does that affect us in the timing of the covenants now? Now, I'd like to read, I must read this, Genesis 3:14 to 18, because I think this is very important. Genesis 3:14 says, the blessing of Abraham might come upon the Gentiles. So that's the star seed in Christ, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. Brethren, I speak in the manner of men, though it's only a man's covenant. So even though if it's only just a man's covenant, if it is confirmed, no one annuls or adds to it. Now, to Abraham, actually, just stop before I go on. What Paul's getting at there is people were saying, okay, Abraham was appointing time. Moses and the law came later, 430 years later. So this is what people were saying. If Moses came later, that means Moses trumps or overrides Abraham. What Paul is saying here, that even if it's a man's covenant, if it's confirmed, so by sacrifice, seal, and oath, if it's confirmed, you cannot annul it and you cannot add to it. Verse 16, now to Abraham and his seed, capital S, that's Jesus. To Abraham and Jesus were the promises made. He does not say seeds, small s, as of many, but one, which is to your seed, capital S, who is Christ. So what he's saying is the promises of the Abrahamic covenant were made to Abraham and to the son, not to you. But we'll clarify this in a moment. Verse 17, this I say that the law, which was 430 years later, cannot annul the covenant that was confirmed before God in Christ. And in my opinion, when he says before God in Christ, I think that's the fire and the torch in Genesis 15 passing through the carcass. That it should be made of no effect. For verse 18, for if the inheritance is of the law, it is no longer of promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. And I can add by sacrifice, by seal, by oath. Can't annul it. So Abraham, 430 years later, we have the Mosaic and the Palestinian covenant. Just because they came later in time, they cannot annul all the promises in the Abrahamic. And I'll add this. The Mosaic and the Palestinian were conditional covenants with no oath. The Abrahamic is unconditional with an oath. So the Mosaic, the onus was on God's people at that time, Israel, to fulfill their side of the commandments. But they didn't. It cannot annul the promises of the Abrahamic. So all the promises of the Abrahamic flow through to the cross to a higher spiritual level in the new and everlasting. And lastly, the application for today, well, we've already said a lot of this, righteousness by faith for those of faith, victory over enemies, we've spoken about that, blessed to be a blessing, blessing of the communion, and so on. Now, do you notice the promises are to the son? We've already said to Abraham and his seed. So, and the mediator was Melchizedek, or in the new covenant, Jesus. I want to say this. You are not the mediator of the covenant. Jesus is. And that means when you mess up, you have not fallen out of covenant with the Father. Now, there may be some blessings that you will not enter into, but you have not excluded yourself from covenant, even when you mess up, because you're not the mediator. Jesus is. And it's not whether you're good, it's that Jesus is good. Okay? So I want to close with Galatians 3:29. By the way, just getting back to you not being the mediator, remember, Abram was put to sleep. There was no works. He had no part in the covenant, even though it was made to him. There was nothing he did for it. God put him to sleep. It was all done by God. That's his grace. Wow. And Galatians 3:29, I want to just read this because this is important. It says this: if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Wow. If you're in Christ, all those promises of Abraham, or Abram, shall I say, all those promises are yours by faith. God bless you.